It's been a week since the Supreme Court handed down its historic decision, striking down Roe v. Wade and ending the constitutional right to an abortion. Across the country, supporters of abortion rights are continuing to take to the streets in protest. They and Democratic lawmakers argue the decision threatens the lives of women and will lead to other rights being taken away. Republicans, though, are condemning the protests. Here's what Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina had to say.
When Roe came out, we didn't burn down the Capitol as conservatives. We didn't go to liberal justices' homes and try to intimidate them. The radical left are constitutional anarchists. They're literally trying to change this country from top to bottom.
But on Wednesday, I interviewed former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. She expressed her outrage over the court's ruling.
It's the most arrogant misreading of history and law that you could ever find. It is so narrow and baseless. It was not only ignorant, but almost dismissive to the point of contempt for women's lives and women's choices.
As all this plays out, on Thursday, President Biden called the ruling, quote, destabilizing.
The first and foremost thing we should do is make it clear how outrageous this decision was and how much it impacts not just on a woman's right to choose, which is a critical piece, but on privacy generally.
The president also said he supports changing the Senate filibuster rules to codify privacy and abortion rights into federal law. But Democrats in Congress do not have the votes to do it. Joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Peter Baker, Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times. And joining me here in studio, Tia Mitchell, Washington Correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and Pete Williams, a longtime Justice Correspondent for NBC News. So Pete, of course I have to start with you. You've been covering the Supreme Court and all over this. We got to see a little bit about what a PostRoe America might look like this week. What stands out to you based on your reporting, given the fact that there are trigger laws and state bans already going into effect?
So what's happening in the states is we know the Supreme Court says the federal Constitution doesn't provide a right to abortion. So now the question is, do state constitutions provide the right that the federal one doesn't? And we're seeing lawsuits attacking two things. The trigger laws that were put in place while Roe was in effect that said once Roe is struck down, then abortion is banned. And then secondly, a set of laws that were on the books before Roe was decided by the Supreme Court that have just been sitting there sort of idling, now coming back to life. And the difference between the federal Constitution and the state constitutions is this. There is no explicit right to privacy in the U.S. Constitution. And in a sense, that's sort of what the Roe controversy is all about. But many of these state constitutions actually use the P word. They actually say that state constitutions guarantee a right to privacy. For example, in Florida, in Texas, in Utah, there's discussion about parental rights, family rights, personal autonomy. So we've got 13 lawsuits now pending in the state courts that basically try to say either the trigger laws or these pre-Roe bans are unconstitutional under the state constitutions.
Well, of course, as all of that sort of legalese is happening, I want to put up a map for people showing where things stand. Already, we have a dozen states that have banned access to the procedure in all or most cases. Given these new legal battles, the other thing that I've been thinking about and wanting to ask you is what's the sort of reality on the ground for medical providers, for women? Where do they stand as all these legal battles are happening?
It's very confusing because it's quite, the bare bones of it are obvious. Doctors can't perform abortions. Pharmacies can't hand out the medication for the so-called Plan B or the pills, the abortion pills. But who knows? Can, exactly in what circumstances can a doctor perform an abortion if the life of a mother is threatened or there's rape or incest? In Louisiana, that's one of the reasons the laws are on hold right now, because there are 3 separate provisions, and a state judge agreed we've got to work this out. So until we can, let's put it on hold. Some states are going to try to block people from traveling to other states or make it a crime to do that. The federal government says it's going to try to protect that right. What about sending abortion pills from states where it's legal to states where it isn't legal? Who knows? That's all to be worked out.
And as really Pete lays out this confusing legal strategy and sort of the confusing legal battles. Tia, I want to come to you because I interviewed former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who really said Democrats need to get mobilized against this. They need to really figure out how to push back on this. But she also said she's not certain when abortion rights, if at all, could be restored. What's your sense of the Democratic strategy and the Republican strategy as this is playing out?
My sense is that the Democrats don't really have a clear strategy for how to overcome what the Supreme Court has done, because we know that the filibuster is the barrier in Congress. President Biden has said Congress should pass a law that protects the right to abortion access, but you need 10 Senate Republicans right now, and they don't seem to have the votes. And yes, President Biden has said carve out the filibuster so that Democrats can do it alone, but Democrats don't have the votes for that either. And it seems like on the Republican side, their strategy is sit back and let the states decide, knowing that there are so many states, as you just showed on that map, that are ready to restrict or prohibit abortions altogether. So it allows the Republicans to kind of claim these wins without having to do anything at the federal level.
And Peter, what Tia just broke down is really about the fact that Democrats do not have the votes, right? She said that more than once, and that is in some ways the thesis of what's going on with the Democrats in terms of their issues there. What are you hearing about the White House strategy, the president's thinking about this week?
Well, I think that the president is in a bad position in the sense that he will be remembered as the president who was presiding at the time that a woman's right to access to abortion is rescinded, and yet will not satisfy the progressives in his own party with an aggressive enough stance, what they believe is an aggressive enough stance in response to that. And that's because, of course, Joe Biden isn't going to go as far as the left wants him to go. They would like him, some of them would like him to pack the court, add more justices, for instance, to do things, in terms of ruling that the FDA can supersede state abortion laws in the case of medicinal abortion pills, things that they have not, so far at least, been willing to do. And I think that that is a tension point. That's why you saw him come out this week and say clearly he did think it was okay, in fact, necessary to get rid of the filibuster for Roe v. Wade, even though, as Tia said, there aren't the votes to do that even now as he speaks. And what the argument he's going to do is take this into the fall. You heard him in that clip you played, Yamiche, say it's not just about abortion, it's about privacy. And the argument the White House is going to make come in the midterm elections is this isn't just about abortion. You may or may not be comfortable with abortion, but it is about a broader spectrum of rights and a broader issue of extremism. And they're going to try to make it the case that the other side is so extreme that it's not only taking away your right to access to abortion, but it might take away your right to contraception. It might, rescind same-sex marriage and all these other things. That's why he said the word privacy today, because he would like to emphasize this is a broader threat, even though Justice Alito, and Pete knows this better than I do, tried to make clear in his majority opinion that that's not where the court is headed. Justice Thomas gave them enough ammunition by saying it would be where he would like to go in his own personal opinion.
And I want to also ask you about something, Peter. I want to, if you can, give us just a quick history lesson about when Democrats did have the votes, possibly when they were controlling the presidency and the House and the Senate in the 1990s, early 2000s. Why didn't they codify, or why couldn't they codify Roe v. Wade and abortion rights then? Because there's been a lot of questions about that I've been hearing from voters.
Yeah, it's a great question because, in fact, you wouldn't be relying on the Supreme Court if there was a national law. You wouldn't have to wait for a court to reinterpret the Constitution if the law of the land passed by Congress and signed by a president said that there is a national right to abortion. But you're right. The Democrats had opportunities, had moments when they had enough control of the Congress and the presidency to do it. They didn't. In the 90s, I think the issue was partly was the Democrats themselves were more, diverse on the issue of abortion. They were more anti-abortion Democrats back then who would have found a vote like that very uncomfortable, would have voted against it, in fact, and were from districts that were pretty rural or pretty conservative and were not in that vein. Today, the Democrats and Republicans are much more homogenous on this. Republicans are almost entirely anti-abortion. The Democrats are almost entirely pro-abortion rights. And so you could have that vote, but they don't have the votes. The last chance they had was Obama's first term, when they did for a moment, for about a year, had 60 votes in the Senate. They didn't choose to do it because they felt like they had a lot of other things to do. They had the economy to rescue. They had climate change. They had immigration. And they didn't perceive the threat from the Supreme Court to be very real at that time.
And that list of issues and challenges really still mirrors a lot of the stuff that's on their agenda now. Pete, I want to come back to you. How might this ruling impact other rights like same-sex marriage, voting rights, even affirmative action if it's the next term?
Well, it depends on which part of the Supreme Court ruling you read. The logic of the court's ruling was there is no constitutional right to abortion because it's not enumerated, it's not spelled out in the Constitution. And in order to find unenumerated rights, you have to look at whether something is deeply rooted in history, tradition, and essential to the concept of ordered liberty. That's what the court said. Well, obviously, same-sex marriage flunks that test. It's not deeply rooted, nor is the right to contraceptives or interracial marriage or a whole bunch of other guarantees. However, 4 times in the opinion, Alito says, don't worry, those other precedents are safe because abortion's different. It involves a life. Justice Thomas doesn't think it's different enough. You know, I think part of this is better for you all to answer because I think part of it is there a political push? Will the states now try to ban? That's how it would get to the Supreme Court if the states try to ban same-sex marriage or ban access to contraceptives. It seems hard for me to believe there's a national groundswell to ban contraceptives.
And a quick follow, which is, I saw Senator Cornyn tweet, now do Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown v. Board of Education, and of course, for viewers who don't know that, those are the seminal landmark decisions that dealt with desegregating schools in our country. Do you have any sense of whether or not there's a legal grounds for that? There's even talk about that. I thought it was a fake tweet, but when I saw it, it was real.
I have no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah. I'll just leave it there then, Pete. You're like, I have no idea what he's talking about, and I'll move on then. I'll say this. I want to bring up the latest poll from PBS NewsHour, if we could put it up for folks. It found that more than half of Americans oppose the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. 88% of Democrats, 20% of Republicans, 53% of independents. Tia, how could what might those numbers mean for Democrats and for the midterms as they are trying to, Democrats, focus voters' attention on abortion when there are so many other issues like inflation and other things, but polls are showing that in some ways public opinion might be on their side.
Right, and that's what I thought was interesting about what Pete just said is that the Supreme Court knew that abortion isn't necessarily something that even the public is clamoring for. It's coming from the right, but not necessarily coming from the majority of all Americans. And that didn't preclude them from making this ruling, so there's no indication that other things might come along too that might be politically unpopular. What Democrats are hoping is that it's unpopular enough and has their base fired up enough that it might help them in the midterms. We know that history is not on the side of Democrats as far as keeping control of the House. And they're hoping that this issue is enough to motivate people, especially those independents who we know can swing a lot of votes in a lot of states, to perhaps keep more Democrats, help them pick up some seats, and perhaps keep that majority. It's still, you know, a long shot for them, but they're hoping this is an issue, knowing that the economy is bringing them down. President Biden's approval ratings are bringing them down. They hope abortion might be a winning issue for them.